Today, I want to reveal to you interesting details about the events of the week that you might have missed. Let's figure out why the tariff war turned out to be a global lie and a distraction, why Bitcoin can surpass gold. Discuss crazy price forecasts, incredible and-kind metrics, and everything else. In short, it will be interesting, and let's get started. We start with this tweet by President Donald Trump. China and the US are in direct talks. Trump says that the first contact in Switzerland was very good, and, according to him, they reached an agreement on many issues. Also, in a friendly but constructive manner, China and the United States discussed a complete reset of trade relations. And while Trump says there has been tremendous progress, I think this deal is going to take some time. It's not going to be immediate. But the fact that it happens, the market perceives positively. And this positive can be seen in this diagram. Here are the top assets for the last 60 days, which are very important since it was during these 2 months that the chaos began, due to tariff wars. And as we can see, buying in this chaos was a good idea for those who were not afraid to buy when everyone else was in a panic. The best asset, oddly enough, was MicroStrategy. It has grown by 60% in 60 days. By percentage every day literally the same. Solana grew by 38%, Tesla by 30%, Bitcoin by 25%, and Ethereum also by 25%. Ethereum has caught up with Bitcoin for the first time in many years and even surpassed it. If you look at the ratio of Ether to Bitcoin, as we can see, there was an upward breakout here and very strong. What does it all mean? This means that you do not need to pay attention to the noise. It will disappear sooner or later, and then everyone will understand again that you need to buy not on growth, when everything is green, but when everything is red, when the time of crisis comes. All this noise will disappear, and you will understand what you should have bought during the chaos. And a tariff war. This is not the first such case. The last such case was, for example, coronavirus. Either the Terramoon crash or the FTX crash. But there are some assets that have not moved at all since December 2024 year. This is Ripple SRP, for example. Last year, XRP was a hero, and now it is at a standstill. Perhaps he is just lagging behind others, and his time to shine is still in the future. Here's another interesting statistic from River. More Americans own Bitcoin than gold. Moreover, the percentage of the world's population that owns Bitcoin is also growing. Already 4% of the world's population holds Bitcoin, and in fact, this is a very small figure, so we can say that this is just the beginning. There are still 96% of the people of the earth ahead. But look at this graph. It shows the growing popularity of Bitcoin as a reserve asset of public companies. Now there are about 80 companies, but as you can see, from 2021 year to about 2024 year, this number remained almost unchanged. But pay attention to how exactly in 2025 year this graph became almost vertical. I think in the future, even more public companies will add Bitcoin to their reserves. It also tells us that we have been reaching the first 4% for 15 years, but we will reach the next 50%. Much, much faster. Much faster than many people can imagine. So I say hello to the golden beetles. It looks like you will be overtaken one way or another, and overtaken in a big way. If this trend continues, it's only a matter of time before Bitcoin equals gold in terms of market capitalization. But keep in mind that this is if and when. I don't guarantee that this will happen. The capitalization of gold today is estimated at 22 as much as 35/100ths of $1 trillion. Now I want to add some memes. Today I have 2 memes, the first one I'm going to show, and the second one at the end of the video. Let's start with this. And although this is just a joke, there is something much more hidden in it. It turned out that Trump was tricked into promoting XP as part of the American crypto reserve. Now this data is a bit outdated, but nevertheless, over the past week, alt bitcoins have shown themselves very well in relation to Bitcoin. Ethereum has recovered strongly, growth of more than 35%, Solana has grown by 18%, Litecoin has also grown. Of the top coins, only the XRP has not yet shown anything in relation to Bitcoin. Now let's talk about cycles. This is a graph from Alfractal. Alfractal believes that the Bitcoin cycle is fully preserved, and its peak is expected in October 2025 year. At the same time, they see the bottom of the next bear market in October 2026. But before that, of course, there will be high volatility. We will not grow vertically upwards. What is the essence of this graph? Here's my theory. Firstly, the influence of halving is getting smaller with each cycle. Secondly, this particular cycle moves not so much by halving, but by adding Bitcoin to the reserve assets of different companies, as well as with pot Bitcoins and TEFs. The rest, just noise. And since we have lost 2 or 3 months due to tariff hysteria, I believe that this cycle will be slightly lengthened. And this means that if it does follow the traditional path, as it is written and drawn here, then it may not last until October, as Al Fractal says, but until November or December. Let's see. In any case, I will be there for you all along the way. And by the way, in this regard, Bitcoin unexpectedly differs from Nasdaq or S&P 500. In the video before last, we talked about the fact that Nasdaq is now at risk of repeating 2022, as it is below the 200-day moving average, which usually acted as support. And we're hitting it right now. It's very reminiscent of this moment here. You see growth, collapse under this line, recovery to this line, retest, which was unsuccessful. And an unsuccessful retest led to a bear market on Nasdaq. And now we see a similar picture. Growth, failure below this line, return to it. And now there is a retest of this line right now. If it is unsuccessful, we risk repeating this scenario here. But what happens to Bitcoin while Nasdaq is at a crucial point for himself over the past few years? Bitcoin, meanwhile, has a completely different picture. Yes, Bitcoin also fell below its 200-day moving average, but it returned above it and flew further up. It does not resemble this moment at all, which we had in the 2022 year. Then we also failed below this line, then we had a retest of this line, it turned out to be unsuccessful, which led to a bear market on Bitcoin. We haven't seen it now. On the contrary, we see a situation that is very similar to the one we saw here. And this is a very interesting point, because if we compare the stack here and Bitcoin here, then we see that Bitcoin surpasses the stack. It is above its 200-day moving average, while the stack is below it. And if we look at the ratio of Bitcoin to the stack, we will see that for a long time, since about November 2024 year, this ratio has been trading in this wide range. But right now we have jumped out of it up. This means that Bitcoin is superior to Nasdaq. In addition, if we compare Bitcoin and gold, we see that the last Bitcoin breakthrough was accompanied by a fall in gold. However, these are short-term movements. We see that sometimes gold still surpasses Bitcoin, such as here, or here, and even here. But in general, over a long distance, to buy 1 Bitcoin, you need more and more ounces of gold. Bitcoin is growing faster than gold. Here, for example, is what would happen if you invested $1,000 in gold Bitcoins in the 2014 year. In 2025 year, you would have $111,758 in Bitcoin and $2,541 in gold. You probably have a question why in the period from December 2024 to April 2025, gold surpassed Bitcoin. Yes, at least because China bought this gold as a bad one. Pay attention to this graph. This is a record activity of gold investors in China. It is clear who bought all this gold. Bitcoin is banned in mainland China, so there are simply no other liquid means of saving, only gold. The world's second largest economy can't even legally own Bitcoin. But imagine what will happen when China buys Bitcoin in the same way as gold, when China allows it to be done legally. However, why imagine it? Just look at this graph. From above, the S&P is 500, and from below, the ratio of the market capitalization of gold to the capitalization of S&P shares is 500. And note that this ratio is at its historical minimum. In the past, from these lows, we have seen big ups of this ratio, for example, here or here. Huge gold runs. Naturally, we are not talking about an immediate tomorrow here. Here we are talking about decades. For example, here we trampled on these lows from 1960s to 1970s, and then grew for another 10 years. If history repeats itself, gold could outperform stocks by 300 to 400% over the next decade. Now imagine what Bitcoin, which has a market capitalization 10 times lower, can do. What will happen to Bitcoin during the same decade, given that it is also growing faster than gold, as we found out? There are also global macroeconomic forces at work today, which act as rocket fuel for this trend. The world is moving away from open trade and globalism. US tariff rates are now jumping from almost zero values to levels that we have not seen since the 30s of the last century. Periods of isolationism and protectionism in the past led to a sharp increase in gold prices, which makes sense. Since countries provide their well-being locally and trust counterparties less, how will the coming decade differ from a century ago? The fact that this time the countries will have a choice. In addition to gold, there is also Bitcoin. After all, Bitcoin did not exist here or here, but it exists here. People have no idea what will happen in 10 years, and what will happen during this decade will shock them. I want to add this diagram of 4-year cycles. It begins with the 2011th year, and now we are in the 3rd year of a 4-year cycle. And it is still green, as you can see. Let me put this away. And if this 4-year cycle continues to work, then historically the next 4th annual candle should be red, like, for example, here, here, and here. Bitcoin is currently trading above $104,000 as I speak. The bottom of the market was about $15,500, so we have already grown 6 or 7 times. But this little bit of growth here, this year, is quite insignificant, quite restrained, compared to this and even more so these two. This 3rd year, in which we are now, has grown by only 14%. This 3rd year of this 4-year cycle has grown by 70%, this one by 1,317%, and this one by 5,234%. I still think that before these marks, the price of Bitcoin sooner or later in this cycle should grow $125,000–130,000. For the sake of interest, I looked at how much the price of Bitcoin fell in the previous 4th years of the 4-year cycle. Everywhere it is about 75 to 82%. So in the next 4th annual red candle, if there is one, we can expect something similar. The next bear market of Bitcoin may collapse its price by at least 75%. This should be expected when the cycle reaches its peak. Katie Wood from Ark Invest repeated her forecast on the BBC. She says that Bitcoin will win back market share from gold and institutional investors, and this will allow it to approach the price of $1.5 million per coin. In her opinion, the institutionals have just started trying Bitcoin. I don't know what about the institutions, they seem a little slow to me. Because ordinary Americans are already investing more in Bitcoin than in gold. This turning point has finally happened. Perhaps Americans are just starting to realize this. This chart shows the strength of savings in Bitcoin. And perhaps someone who sees it will think that the 401k pension plan is already the last century. Bitcoin is a new retirement plan. Imagine if one or both people work in your family, it doesn't matter. This chart shows what will happen if you save 10% of your salary in Bitcoin. Of course, if you started in 2025, then you will not feel the effect yet, because the year has just begun. But if you started doing this in the 2018th year, then during this time, you would have invested about $55,000 to $60,000 in Bitcoin. If you invested 10% of your income in Bitcoin every day, taking into account the growth of Bitcoin since 2000 of the 18th year, your $55,000 to $60,000 today would be estimated at $500,000. If you had started in 2020, the result would have been more modest, but still, you would have invested about $50,000, and you would have already received $207,000. In other words, your 10% per month has quadrupled. Think of it this way. If you are saving $1,000 a month, in fact, you are saving $4,000 a month. If you invest in Bitcoin, I have been doing this for many years, and this is the only way to earn on cryptocurrency with minimal risk. The earlier I started, the stronger the result. And yes, I really like to buy more separately, except for my monthly purchases, when the market is falling heavily, and panic flares up everywhere. Of course, I don't buy with such sums as Ark Invest or Michael Saylor. I'm not a billionaire, but I try in my own way. But even without perfect timing, just putting it off a little bit, you can come to very serious results. This is the power of small steps, regular investments. That is why people make retirement savings, create goals and plans. It is important not just to invest, but to understand why you are doing it. What is the goal? A lot of people, I think most people, just don't have the patience for it. They want a lot of money tomorrow, and preferably without strain. But a lot of money tomorrow, and without strain. This is most likely about a scam, about a divorce, about fraud. Most likely, such people will lose absolutely all of their money, absolutely all of their property, which they will mortgage for this. And here's another cool diagram. It's even depressing, if you think about it that way. In the year 2012, it was necessary to work for about 5 minutes to buy 1 Bitcoin. In the 2020th year, you would have to work about 400 hours to buy 1 Bitcoin. And now you need to work 3,300 hours to buy 1 Bitcoin. The average worker in the United States works about 2,000 hours a year. That is, he will not even earn 1 Bitcoin in a year, provided that he does not spend a cent, which, of course, is impossible. That is, today, you need to work very hard to earn 1 Bitcoin. And that is why it is so important to own 1 whole coin, because in the future it will buy you the time of your life. And I really like the explanation at the bottom. It's not Bitcoin getting more expensive, it's fiat losing value. And that depresses me even more. After all, the time of your work devalues over time. Now, Bitcoin and TF showed the largest inflow in the last 6 months. They're finally back. Bears simply will not be able to win this game until such an influx of spot Bitcoins and TIFs stops. Remember, I said about Katya would that the institutionals are just starting to come in. So, now they're coming in big. You just look at this explosion. And Bitcoin has overtaken the S&P by 513% since the day of liberation. That was 2 months ago. 2 months ago, Trump announced America's Liberation Day. And since then, the S&P 500 has lost to Bitcoin. What was then called a tariff panic, I perceived as another coronavirus hysteria. I see only opportunities in such moments. Time in this market has taught me this. And it looks like a tariff war. This is just a negotiation tactic. The US, for example, has concluded an agreement with the UK that will strengthen both economies. Now the US and China are meeting to discuss the possibility of a deal between the Americans and the Chinese. I think sooner or later they will sign something similar with China. And it will be good for the market. Then BlackRock moves to a whole new level. They are not going to stop at spot Bitcoin and TIFs. Imagine, BlackRock has just admitted that they are meeting with the Securities and Exchange Commission to discuss the staking of spot ETFs, crypto futures, tokenization of real assets, and standards for approving new crypto ETFs. BlackRock wants to launch new cryptos, for example, spot Solana ETF, and want the holders of these ETFs to be able to stake them. And, of course, they want to tokenize absolutely the whole world. Larry Fink is constantly talking about this. And regulation is needed for this. I think if the SEC approves the tokenization of assets, then cryptocurrencies that are associated with Sir W.E. real world assets can respond well to this. So it's all happening right now, and it's happening very fast. And thank God that we now have such a political regime in which the SEC is friendly to cryptocurrencies. It makes our lives easier. It will accelerate these processes even more. Now, speaking of BlackRock, they had 19 consecutive days of VIT influx, the longest series this year. Smart money came and goes, and in general, the TEFs must be kept in mind. Why? Because they are buying up a huge amount of Bitcoins. They have almost 1 and 2 million Bitcoins. Remember that there cannot be more than 21 million coins. And this, if we do not take into account those that have already been irretrievably lost, is about 5 million. That is, of the 15 to 16 million coins that still exist, 1 and 2 million belong to spot Bitcoin and TIF. And of these 1 and 2 million coins, 52% belong to BlackRock. Grayscale, for example, had 620 or 640,000 Bitcoins at the very beginning. Now they have 189,000 coins left. Fidelity has even more than Grayscale, although they started with 440 Bitcoins. Why is that? Because Grayscale has higher commissions, and commissions matter, they eat up your profits, and especially over a long distance. More good news. This graph shows an analysis of the capital rotation in Bitcoin, which compares the behavior of old and new investors. In other words, this is a capital rotation between investors who bought less than 30 days ago and investors who hold 1 or 2 years. At the moments when the capital rotation, this blue line, rose to 35 and 53%, there were peak phases of Bitcoin growth. And the good news is that in this cycle, the peak was about 35%. This coincides with the phases of intense speculation and rapid price growth, which we have observed. Conversely, if this blue line falls to 12% and especially below, then this historically coincides with the accumulation phase at the bottom. And we see that recently this line here touched 12%, and now it has bounced to 16, as much as 0.7%. In short, when we are in the range of 35 to 53%, it's time to sell. When we are around 12% plus or minus, you can buy. The other good news that this chart talks about is the steady influx of fresh capital into Bitcoin. If, say, 10 million more come in next week, it will be a huge amount of new capital that enters the crypto space. And the last time we saw such a volume was in January of 2021 year. Also, January 2021 year was the last time there was a phase of euphoria. And the mark of 53% was reached on this indicator. Now we have 16 and 7%. So it's not over yet, ladies and gentlemen. The end will be when we get to 35%, and especially if we get to 53%. Among the institutions and big capital, Goldman Registry Office suddenly appeared. Recently, they disclosed information that they invested $1.65 billion in spot Bitcoin and BlackRock typhus. This chart here suggests that Bitcoin investors seem to have held onto their Bitcoins tightly during this increased volatility. Due to the trade war, unrealized profit is almost at peak values, as you can see, which means they didn't realize their profits, which means they didn't sell their coins. These are real diamond hands. I'm proud. And now about the stablecoins. It is impossible to talk about cryptocurrency without mentioning its fuel. Stablecoins. The volume of transactions on stablecoins has reached a new historical peak, $1.8 trillion. If you still think that the crypt is just a fashion, that it is immature and not so important, no, those times are long gone. The cryptocurrency is already large-scale and will not go anywhere. 1.8 trillion volume is monstrous. And what strikes me the most is that this is just the beginning. What will happen next, it's scary to imagine, especially considering that the US accepts the regulation of the stablecoins and believes that the stablecoins will help the US dollar maintain its dominance. And speaking of the stablecoins, we recall the largest of them. This is the Tether of her children. With the current policy, which has become quite crypto-friendly in the US, Tether is really going to go under American jurisdiction. Who would have thought? After all, for how many years in a row, everyone has been saying Tether is a scam, it's offshore, it's opaque, dangerous and suspicious. And now guess who keeps all their bitcoins? This is Cantor Fitzgerald, part of 21 Capital. Michael Saylor gave a cool interview and held a great conference this week, but one key thought from him struck me. And there is something in it. He says that now there is a chance to buy $13 million for $100,000. Exchange $100,000 for $13 million. He means that Bitcoin now costs about $100,000, but in 20 years, its price will be $13.4 million. Let's see. We'll see what exactly it will be possible to buy with these $13 million 20 years later, given that they are depreciating. I just started talking about Saylor, as 5 seconds ago he hinted that he would soon buy even more bitcoins. Nothing's going to stop this guy. And to be honest, I would do the same, but I don't have billions of dollars, so I buy 1/100th of Bitcoin and rejoice. Even so, the path to a portfolio of $1 million is quite real. We'll manage. And remember, as soon as you earn the first $1 million, the second one will come much, much faster. Now there is good news for Ethereum holders as well. Ethereum Layer 2 will have 1/10 the speed of Salon in 2028 year, if everything goes according to plan. Here is a table with different platforms. Amazon. That's 18.5 orders per second. PayPal. That's 304 transactions per second. Visa 1,700. Solana 65,000 transactions per second, but the Fire Denser update will be able to increase this number to 1/2 transactions per second. Ethereum L2 after the update of Petra will be able to process 420 transactions per second. And Ethereum L2 forecast for 2027 year 5,000 transactions, and after 2027 year 100,000 transactions per second. So the Ether is developing in this matter, but again, other blockchains have already achieved this. Something that the Ether wants to achieve only after 2027. But nevertheless, the Ether has shown a huge increase over the past week. It's up 36% in the last 60 days, but look at this chart. Every time Bitcoin reached $100,000, the Ether, unfortunately, fell. When Bitcoin first reached $100,000, Ether was worth $4,000. Since then, Bitcoin has already reached $100,000 8 times. And when Bitcoin reached $100,000 for the 8th time, Ether is worth only $2,000. Is this $2,000 mark the final bottom for the Ether? I think if Bitcoin remains above $100,000 and does not fall again to the area of $76,000, the Ether will be fine. But if Bitcoin falls a lot now, then Ether can update the minimum on this chart. Solana also showed an excellent week as one of the best cryptocurrencies among the top 10 by market capitalization. And, by the way, Coinbase considered the possibility of repeating the MicroStrategy strategy and starting to invest its bonds in Bitcoin. But then they changed their mind, and maybe they just made a historic mistake. Time will tell, but if so, then Dexum opens up an even brighter future without competition from one of the largest sexes. Now the interesting news from the Tesla world is that a new major player has joined the number of those testing Tesla Sami. This is Us Foods, the largest food distributor in the United States of America. Their Tesla Sami truck was recently spotted near Gigafor in Nevada, and apparently, this is the beginning of something serious. It can be the beginning of a pilot program or training with an instructor from Tesla. What does it all mean? This means that Sami's Tesla is starting to get into the logistics of food and drinks. Now they will be joined by Us Foods, and this is significant. And, by the way, among other companies that are also implementing Tesla Sami, there are such giants as Walmart, Siska, Coca, Dayshul, and others. So this is a chain of the largest logistics and trade brands that is starting to switch to electric trucks from Tesla. Mass production of Tesla Sami is planned for the end of the 25th year, with an increase in deliveries in 2026. 50,000 cars are planned for the beginning. This may increase sales of Tesla cars, which will favorably affect earnings reports, and, accordingly, it will have a good effect on Tesla shares. In addition, it is possible that very soon we will see these tractors on the roads more and more often. And finally, the latest news that may affect the stock market is a stock buyback. Stock buybacks in the United States will soon exceed $1 trillion for the first time this year. Yes, it's good for stocks, but not for companies. Why? Because companies that buy back their shares just want to dump them. And for me it looks like this. When the company's management, instead of investing in growth, in employees, in new technologies or products, simply buys back its own shares. It's a little sad. It's like billionaires receiving interest from the national debt, invest them again in the national debt. By doing so, companies seem to be saying, we don't believe in our own company, we don't believe that we can do something cool in the future. So we just buy shares just to spend money somewhere. And it would be fine if they did it once, when the shares are cheap, for example, in a video. Everything is clear here. They are sure that the price will rise after a big drop and do a buyback. But companies like Apple have been making buybacks for more than a decade in a row, and this no longer looks like a smart move. It looks like a lack of ideas where else to invest money. It is not for nothing that the company is scolded for the lack of innovation. Apparently, they really don't have any ideas. And honestly, if I were them, I would either invest in Bitcoin or spend this money on innovation and development. And just buying back shares for me is like a signal we no longer know how to grow further. And you know what? I think they will do it in the future. They will buy Bitcoin. And finally, the meme of the day, a meme for the entire crypto community. $1 million is not cool. You know what's cool? 1 Bitcoin. And there will come a day, ladies and gentlemen, when 1 Bitcoin will be worth much more than $1 million. You've heard it from Katie Wood and Michael Saylor. And if you have at least one Bitcoin, yes, even if 1/10 of a Bitcoin, keep it very securely. Be very careful with its storage. And in no case do not sell it. Thank you all for watching,